Good morning, guys. This is the teaching video for your assignment for the chronological order with the graphic organizer that's been shared with you for first. Let's look at it. There it is. First, next, and then, and then. This organizer is used to pull out the important details for the first 8 paragraphs. So I wanted to do this with you guys just so that you have this to guide you as you will be doing the next one and then coming up with the main idea on your own. I've just copied and pasted the paragraphs, the first 8 paragraphs onto this Google Doc so I could annotate with you guys as we're reading. In 1830, the first railroad in the United States opened in Baltimore, and it had just 21 kilometers of track. Other railroad lines were built, mostly in the Northeast. Soon, the East Coast was crisscrossed with train tracks connecting cities. So paragraph 1 gives us the introduction to this passage we're going to read, and it kind of lets us know when the first railroad tracks were laid, and then over time, how they began to connect cities across the East Coast and were used for transportation. I highlighted this very first sentence in yellow because that was a key detail. That is the date, the first thing that happened leading us into this paragraph. So when we are filling out our tracker at the bottom, we would definitely want to add this sentence as our first key detail, because without that, the rest of the story would not go on as it does. By the 1850s, railroads were changing cities. For example, in 1850, Chicago had 30,000 people and 1 railroad. By 1856, the city had 10 railroads, and by 1860, its population had tripled due to the railroad system. The railroads affected everyday life and how people did business. Inside paragraph 2, we have some of my, my wow face emojis I would usually draw in class. Some pretty cool details and facts that explain to us how those railroads affected everyday life. So this last sentence that's highlighted in the aqua color, that is our main idea for paragraph 2. These sentences here would be our supporting details for that main idea. Paragraph 3, farmers shipped corn and wheat through Chicago by rail. Factories were built and their products were shipped to customers via the railroad. Hotels sprang up for visiting business travelers. New housing was built for the additional workers. Suburbs grew up around areas where people used the railroads to commute to work. As I read paragraph 3, I started noticing this idea of movement of either people or goods. So farmers were moving corn, shipping corn with the railroad tracks. Factories were built, and then their products were being shipped to customers via the railroad system. And then last but not least, people were using the railroads to commute to work. So we're starting to see the trend of commuting and movement of goods and items by the railroad tracks. A few dreamers wanted to expand the railroad to the lightly settled West, but there was little demand for it. Then gold was discovered in California in 1848. Word spread and people rushed there to look for gold. They found a place that had great weather and fine soil. Soon, other people moved there to farm or start businesses. So the orange were the details that I thought were important. The yellow, again, the key details. So the fact that the people that were dreaming to expand the railroad presents a need and a want, but then we have that conjunction, but, and when we see that conjunction but, we know something's going to go against that. So while they wanted to expand the railroad, there was not much of a demand. There was not really a good reason why. So that kind of presented a little problem. However, that next sentence in yellow, the gold was discovered in California in 1848, changed everything. So that was a key detail. If gold had not been discovered, do you think the railroad tracks would have been laid and that expansion west would have happened? Probably not, because there still wouldn't have been a need. So we're going to move this key detail down to our chart for our next. That was the next key detail that created the movement in the westward expansion. Okay. Word spread and people rushed there to look for gold. They found a place. Oh, I already read that. I'm so sorry, guys. Let's go to paragraph 5. Travelers crossed the plains in covered wagons or sailed around South America to reach California. Either way, the trip took 4 months or more. I don't know if you remember yesterday as we explored the story a little bit and looked at some of those text features, we saw those photographs, those historical photographs of the covered wagons and the horses, and we talked about how that picture really brought a visual to our brains of how long that journey must have taken to see them traveling that way. Because of that, that's a long time, people wanted a better way to travel to the west. Farmers and business owners in the West needed a faster way to ship their goods east. Think about a farmer shipping corn over after 4 months. Do you think the corn would even be good when it arrived out west? Probably not. So there's another need for a faster way to ship. Leaders began to talk about building a transcontinental railroad. Transcontinental. So think about continents, trans being across, and so we're talking about this big system. Suddenly, the dreamers' idea of joining the eastern and the western coasts together began to make sense. Building a railroad across the country was a huge project. Okay, think about how long it took just to travel by horse and wagon. Now we're going to go back and we're going to lay railroad tracks along the way. Oh my goodness. It would require money, a team of engineers, so people to design the tracks and figure out how to lay the tracks so that there's not accidents and bad things happening. Armies of workers. Oh my goodness, the amount of people it would need. And then of course it would need a leader, someone to kind of keep things in order and make sure things were done right. Theodore Judah was a young engineer who had built railroads in the East. He believed that a transcontinental railroad could and should be built. So now we have the introduction of a leader who believes in the system, who has experience, and might just set this off. So Judah goes, he went to Washington, D.C., and asked the government for land and money. He convinced President Abraham Lincoln to sign the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862. This plan set up 2 railroad companies. Guys, that's huge. Without President Lincoln's signature on the Pacific Railroad Act of 1862, Judah would not have been able to get the money, the team, the engineers, the workers, all of the stuff he needed. So this becomes another key detail because the rest of our story, the westward expansion, couldn't have been possible had he not signed that act. The Central Pacific Railroad Company would begin in California, laying track east. The Union Pacific Railroad Company would start at the Missouri River, laying track west. They would meet somewhere in the middle. So we have teams of workers on both sides, both coasts, the Pacific coast and the Atlantic coast, and they're going to move inward to the center of America, coming together to create these train tracks that reach across the entire nation. Each company would receive 6,400. Later, that doubled to 12,800 acres of land and $48,000 in government bonds for each mile of track built. The company that got the furthest would make the most money. Sounds a little competitive to me, don't you think? The land and money proved a good incentive for each company to do its best to win. The Union Pacific seemed to have the easier job. It was building across flat land. The Central Pacific had to run track through the Sierra Nevada mountains. That doesn't seem very fair in the sense of having this contest. If one team is given kind of a leg up, so to speak, they have flat land to build tracks on versus mountains. I don't know if that's very fair, but it is what it is. Either way, the race was on. So this last yellow sentence was another key detail, because now they've been offered an incentive, they've been given a task, and it has begun. So when we read from here into the next paragraphs, we're going to find out what happened. What happened when that race began? who got there first? Were there troubles along the way? So as we begin reading on, we're going to want to continue to gather those key details, those details that allow us to see the journey unfold. And without them happening, the westward expansion would not have continued on the way it did. So they're key details, but they're also listed in chronological order, allowing us to see the westward expansion unfold in a way that makes sense and that follows itself through to the end. So read on, my friends, and we will see what happens as we continue reading our story. See you in a little bit. Bye.